All right, so from our attendees list, it looks like a lot of people have already joined, which is excellent. So I think we'll probably kick off here and hope that people can pick up as we continue forward. So welcome to today's webinar. We're going to discuss some basic enhancements and things to be aware of and understand when you start to look at integrating Okta with Office 365. So for today's agenda, we've got a couple things on the cards. So first of all, for those of you who are not aware, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a really high level, really high level and broad understanding of what is Okta, what does it do, where does it sit in the market. We're going to go through my four big benefits of using Okta with Office 365. So these are me personally as an IT administrator. The things that Okta just makes easy for people who are adopting Office 365 and want to use it. We'll cover some basic technical considerations. There's a fair bit of stuff to consider when you are implementing, around what you've already got, what your roadmap is, and that sort of stuff. We'll cover SAML versus WS-Fed. So a lot of people struggle with this when they're moving to Office 365. They go, what is this WS-Fed thing? And they don't understand the difference to normal SAML. And then we'll probably finish off with a quick question and answer at the end, just cover off some, user chat questions, anything that, the broader audience wants to know. Unfortunately, my streaming laptop today is having issues, so I can't do any technical demonstrations. But if we need to do that if anyone's interested, they can reach out afterwards and we can set up a one-on-one with that. So let's get right into it. First of all, what is this Okta? So for those of you who are not, Okta experts or who are not, familiar with the product, Okta really it's the market leader in identity as a service solutions, right? So if you go look at Gartner and Forrester and those analysis, companies that actually tell you which products are good, you'll see Okta sitting up in that top right-hand corner, and it's like by a country mile, it's the clear market leader, and it has been for 6 years now. So it's repeatedly the best in breed solution for identity as a service. But what does it actually do? So Okta focuses on joining together all of your services. So you might have cloud platforms like GCP, Azure, AWS. You've got your SaaS applications that your users got, and you've got on-premise systems. And Okta really is the tool that brings all of those together and enables your wider business to use them. So you sit there and you might have external parties, you might have internal staff, you've got customers. It's a single platform to unify access across your IT environment. From a business perspective, it's independent, right? And this is something I call out to all of my customers when they're thinking about the product, is it's independent and it operates by itself. So you're not actually bound by, your platform specific, decisions or platform specific controls. You can go in any which way, and it's intended to, so to speak, act as the mesh, the glue between all of your different products. So for example, if you're talking in Azure AD and you don't want to use Intune, perhaps you can start to look at integrating to Azure AD for Office 365, and then you use VMware Workspace ONE for your MDM platform. And Okta enables you to combine those two systems as a central point of identity, and enable your business to be as flexible as possible in their day-to-day operations. Now that's really well reflected in Okta's business goal, right? And this is their business goal, and it kind of does align to what Xello does as a company, but it's around enabling any organization to use any technology. So it's not so much around what can we afford. It's just say what is best in breed and how do we use it. And if we can't afford best in breed, or we've got business drivers that say we don't want to use that, then we can use those technologies as well. But what about integration specifically for Office 365? So when you talk about Okta and Office 365, it's one of compared to Azure AD, it's the the premier external directory that integrates with Office 365 products. So what you end up getting is you get all of the broad services that Office 365 offers. You know, Azure subscriptions, Office 365, Intune, Dynamics, all of the cloud app security stuff. And then you get all of the uniqueness that Okta provides, plus the integration to every other provider. So I'll cover my 4 benefits, but like I really want to call out even now that there's a near zero footprint for Okta. So if you're talking in the concept of traditional infrastructure, traditional data center management, you have close to no footprint, right? Microsoft has certified Okta as well to work with Office 365 and as a wider suite. And there's been, even like in the last 2 weeks, a huge raft of announcements around Windows Hello and other services coming out of Inspire for Okta support, right? So it's not something that's just, oh yeah, we can kind of plug it in. It is deeply integrated into the service. So I'm going to cover my 4 benefits, right? And these are what I view as a technical specialist in the IDAM space to be the best and my favorite, at least, ways of complementing Office 365 with Okta. And we'll cover these hopefully a bit deeper in the question and answer section if anyone wants to know more. So the first one is Universal Directory and Okta Expression Language. So if anyone in the audience has configured in the past Azure AD or an Azure AD Connect, they're probably used to setting up Active Directory to comply with the Office 365 requirements. So for example, you can't use contoso.local inside of Office 365. It's a non-routable domain, and you have to set up a UPN suffix and then change your users to use that suffix and then sync them up. And if they end up inside of Office 365 with something that it doesn't like or is not desirable, it either won't sync out of AD Connect, or when it hits Office 365, it'll have that nasty non-routable .on Microsoft address. So what Universal Directory allows you to do is it allows you to sync data between not only Active Directory, it allows you to sync data from Active Directory, your HR system, so perhaps using Workday or Chris21 or SAP out of those systems, and applications. So it provides you an amalgamated view of your user data globally within your environment. So if you look at this diagram that I've got on the slide there, everything above the blue line is quote unquote Okta land, and it's pulling in data from third-party applications and directories, identity providers as well, and it pulls that all in and it rolls it up into an Okta user profile. And what that user profile does is it has what is viewed as the authoritative source for the user. So you have profile masters. So for example, if you're talking about replacing AD Connect with Okta, you would have AD as the profile master. And what that allows you to do is you say, well, I'm mastering my profiles here, and it'll push a bunch of data into Okta. And it will also allow you to bring in other data. So for example, I've got Active Directory and I'm importing the username, the business unit, and maybe a manager name, right? So I have those three bits of information. I can also maybe connect into ServiceNow or Finance One, and I can start to ingest other things and map that to the same user. So for example, if I want to talk about cost codes, right, that's something that might be stored in my financial management system, and I can start to pull those in from those applications as well. And I roll all of that up into one profile. That's really useful when you're starting to look at provisioning into Office 365, because you can start to use different attributes to grant access. So perhaps you have Active Directory saying that a person's in finance, right? You can use Universal Directory to put the user into the relevant finance groups within Office 365, but perhaps you have your service such as ServiceNow saying that the user is an IT administrator. You can also use that to push administrative roles in. And to build on top of the capability of expression language or universal directory, we have Okta expression language. Now, this is a really useful tool to allow you to change the data you're bringing into universal directory. So what it does is it leaves your source data, in Active Directory, in ServiceNow, in Salesforce, intact. And as it brings it into Okta, it applies the expressions that you have written to the data. So for a good example is you can use Okta expression language to rewrite usernames. So if you're working in AD and you've got corp.contoso.local, you can use Okta expression language to modify the data as it's imported. So as you sync the directory, you've changed nothing in AD, Okta goes, oh, I see corp.contoso.local, and I'm going to replace that with xello.com.au, right? And that enables Okta administrators and people who are integrating with Okta to not worry about the data that's being shipped by the downstream system or the upstream system. It's all about understanding, what it should be and then pushing that through. So that's the first really big benefit and really powerful tool that is available to Okta users. The next one I want to cover is MFA support out of the box, right? So MFA in Microsoft Stack, by default, with no customizations, no tricky PowerShell, supports 4 MFA methods, right? So you've got the mobile app, the Microsoft Authenticator, and if you're smart enough, you'll also know that works with Google Authenticator because it's the same RFC. You've got the SMS option, so obviously a nice text message, a phone call option. And then for legacy applications like Outlook 2010, you can use an application password, right? Now, that's not to say that you can't enable other options. What we want to call out here is that you have to do things to enable them. So out of the box, you get 4, and it's a fair bit of extra effort to turn on third-party and other MFA providers, right? Whereas when you compare that to Okta, out of the box, within the pre-configured MFA policies, you get 13, right? And that's really wide-ranging. So you can go with hard tokens like RSA tokens, YubiKeys. You can use Windows Hello. So that's, I didn't technically use a token or anything I have in my possession, but I'm sitting in front of my laptop and I've now logged in with a password and my face, right? It supports things that are a bit more flexible in complex and generally frontline worker scenarios. So if you want the users to answer a security question rather than have a token, you can do that as well. Obviously, it's a question for you and your security posture and whether or not that works. But there's a broad range of support out of the box for MFA. The other thing with MFA is when you move to Okta, right, it encourages a change in mindset around MFA policy and product protection. So if you talk to Microsoft engineers, they will tell you, well, with conditional access, you can just protect individual parts of the suite. Now, by moving the MFA protection out of the suite and over to an independent platform, you centralize the MFA policy, the product protection, and you enable your teams to actually be realistic about MFA. So if you have a look in the screenshot on the left, you'll see that the conditional access policy is attempting to protect SharePoint Online. But the reality is that the Office 365 suite is integrated so tightly, so deeply that protecting one part of the product actually affects multiple other parts of that environment. So if you're talking about SharePoint, or if you protect SharePoint, you're going to impact Teams, Planner, Delve, Analytics. There's a whole suite of products that actually rely on SharePoint under the hood, and some of it's quite clear that it relies on SharePoint, but other bits it's like, well, I don't understand, and it's not always called out, right? It's not always managed very well. Protecting it from a single pane of glass allows you to log in once for your users. They get MFA'd once, and then it's a bit more cohesive when you talk about their user experience. So that's the second big benefit for using Okta, simplified and easy MFA. The next one we have is Office 365 licensing roles provisioning, right? So if anyone here's used Active Directory Connect, you'll know that it takes, generally speaking, 30 to 40 minutes for an AD Connect sync to run, depending on how you've set up the synchronization schedules. Most places have it at quarter past and quarter to. And that can be a pretty debilitating delay when your customers or your user base is saying, I need this now, right? And you can force the sync, but that's extra administrator workload, it's extra administrator time, and it can be quite frustrating. Now, with Okta, it actually pushes licenses and roles using the Graph API, and it pushes it, generally speaking, in real time. So I think the biggest delay I've ever experienced with a license push is about 2 minutes, and that's still a lot better than 30, right? Now, when you combine that with stuff like Universal Directory, what you can do is you can start to pull in other sources and push out for using the same data, right? So the example I gave before was pulling in cost codes from Finance One, right? I might pull in that cost code and that data about the user, and I know that, if they're in this business unit that's costing, or this charging area of the business, I can start to push across licenses because they're eligible for that and they're willing to pay for it. Now, by using the group rules and dynamic groups inside of Okta, I can start to push that out of systems that don't traditionally assign licenses, right? It also gives you a single pane of glass for Azure AD group license administration. So if you look in the bottom right, I've got a kind of a screenshot out of the Microsoft doc. If you go to portal.azure.com, you can see user licenses in an amalgamated view. So you can see group licenses and direct assign licenses, which is pretty useful, right? But if you're not used to using portal.azure.com, you might be using admin.office365.com, right? And that's still an administrative portal from the Microsoft side, but it's different, right? So if you go into that portal and you see a user's license and you're not too experienced, maybe you're a help desk administrator, maybe you're early on in your IT journey, and you try and remove a group-based license, so you're trying to remove a group that says they get this license, what you end up doing is you end up actually having an error and you're unable to remove that license, which can be quite frustrating and quite irritating. And then on top of that, again, you can do Azure AD administration and group memberships driven out of stuff that's not traditionally in your identity stack, which is really, really important. It's a single point across all your applications. So to put that in context for you, we actually had an engagement that dealt with this sort of problem this year, right? So if you look inside of the Microsoft doc and you do some Azure PowerShell, you pretty quickly realize that there's a large number of Office 365 licensing SKUs, right? So if just out of the Microsoft doc, there's 74 different possible licenses. And within those 74 licenses, there is a total of 530 different service SKUs. So you can turn on, you can have an E3 license and you can maybe only turn on email, right? But there's still another, 18 SKUs under that. So there's really, really and across that user base, that assigned close to 90,000 licenses. And they were, big multinational company. They had multiple subsidiaries, but they're pushing through, close to $10 million worth of licensing. And they had their EA true up with Microsoft, and they sat down and Microsoft said, well, here's the bill, right? And the bill, they expected it to be over, right? They knew that they were, probably out of whack with what the EA said, but they didn't expect it to be over as much as they wanted, right? So we came in and sat down with them and analyzed their licensing process. We also analyzed their licensing assignments, right? So, and we worked out pretty quickly that they had close to $800,000 in overspend. So that was in two areas. They had people who had both licenses that were actually the same, and they had people who just had the wrong ones, right? So if you're talking about duplicates, maybe you've got a user who's E5 licensed and also E3 licensed, or maybe having a user who's got a P2 license and, an E3 license that enables Exchange and an F1 license that enables everything else, right? And that from an administrator perspective, that's really, really, really difficult to get a consolidated view. So by combining Universal Directory, the group rules that Universal Directory allows, and the automated licensing provision capability of Okta, what you can actually do is you can start to set up rules that automate this full end-to-end process, and they allow you to deliver the capability really, really quickly. So what we ended up doing is we built dynamic groups that were based on a user's cost codes. So within Active Directory, they'd actually had a cost code and a business unit pushed to their account. And we built a dynamic group that said, if you're in this cost code, you get this license, right? And then whenever the downstream system pushed new data into Active Directory, it might update or change that cost code. And rather than the license just being added to their account, what the dynamic groups did is they would take the license off. Right? So if you, for example, you're moving from a cost code that has E3s to a cost code that has E5s, they would take the E3 off and it would assign the E5. And that was different to the process where they had previously, where they would actually call the service desk, and the poor fella on the other side of the phone would say, I need this, and he would assign the license. And if he forgot to remove the license, it never resolved itself, right? So that was a big challenge for them. But once they solved it out, they were saving close to $1 million a year. And think of all the things you can do with $1 million a year. It's not small, right? So that's the first one. And the final one I've got here is the Okta infrastructure footprint, right? So, and this is something that's more prevalent as companies move to the cloud. They move to a SaaS, PaaS first approach. But what you have with Okta is you have one agent for Active Directory that does both user synchronization and user provisioning, right? So if you provision a user into Okta using an agent, and then you want to authenticate that user, it's all the same one, right? If you're doing best practice in a smaller environment, maybe 500 to 5,000 seats, you only need 2, right? And you only go up to 3 when you're hitting 30,000 users, which is, to be honest, it's not the majority of businesses, right? From a HA perspective, you then get HA throughout the full SaaS stack, right? So in Australia, Okta has a data center in Sydney. It's run out of AWS. And then they also have a DR center in Singapore. So it's running, fully highly available, but there's no infrastructure you manage, and you definitely don't pay for that infrastructure, right? Whereas if you're running a comparable Microsoft capability, just using their stack, right? And this is not best practice deployment, and it's not HA, right? You're running 2 AD Connect servers. You've got one as a primary and one as the failover for any errors or issues. You've got a minimum of 2 ADFS servers. You need a WAP and an ADFS server itself, and that's not HA. And you've got a minimum of 3 servers in MIM to manage your provisioning. So you've got your MIM service, you've got your SQL service, and you've got the SharePoint site that MIM actually uses, right? Now, inside of Azure, right, I haven't priced out AWS or any of the other providers. Those 7 servers will run you a minimum of $1,500 a month, right? And that's not HA, and it is not a fully spec service, right? If you've got a larger environment, it's going to cost you more to run that, right? So that's the fourth, and I think personally, from an ongoing OpEx perspective, is the biggest difference in cost. So what are the technical considerations as you move to Office 365 with Okta? Now, the first one I'm going to call out is your integration options. There's a lot. It's not just as simple as installing AD Connect and pushing the data up, right? And you have to consider what you've already got, what you're already operating, and how it's already working. So I can configure Okta to only push licenses and roles. So in that scenario, maybe I've already got AD Connect and I'm happy with it. I've got a bunch of sync rules in it. I just don't want to mess with that configuration. I can use licensing and roles to start automating out my identity, management. In that space, I can say, well, licenses are assigned using these rules and this application that's not AD, and administrative access is actually the same, right? So that's the first one. The second one is profile sync, and that's a bit more powerful in that it syncs user attributes in and out of the service. So I can pull users from Office 365 to Okta, and I can push them the other way. And it syncs a subset. So it syncs the minimum 4 attributes of Okta, which is first name, last name, username, email. and I can create a couple of extras that I want to pull across. It allows for coexistence with Azure AD as well, and you can start to push, data both ways. So if I push a user to Office 365 from Okta, I can edit them over there and then pull them back, and it'll update that way as well. And then the final option, I've put a slash here. There are actually two separate options in the Okta doc, but they're very, very, very similar. Is user sync or universal sync. So user sync does exactly what profile sync does, but it gives you a huge number of a fairly large number of extra attributes. So you can sync extended data about the user, and then universal sync gives you literally everything. So if you're pulling, for example, from Active Directory, one of the extension attributes up, you may be using extension attribute 1 and you've got something that's relevant to a third-party system in there, you can start to push that out as well, right? And that's where universal sync comes in. It's a very edge case scenario. Generally speaking, user sync is going to get the job done, but it's really, really powerful, right? User sync is traditionally what we also replace AD Connect functionality with. The next consideration is the cutover and migration, right? So Okta, Office 365, when it's using SSO, is one of the few providers that actually forces what we call a big bang migration. So you can't phase your users over when you federate a specific domain. So you might have two domains and you can phase users over in that scenario. But if you're phasing over, a company.com URL, or you're moving that over, you have to cut over all the users who are using company.com immediately, right? So that's a consideration. It can be a bit of a big user change when you do that cutover. The next one is SSO. You need a registered domain if you're going to do SSO, and it needs to be registered and verified within Azure AD. That can take a bit of time if your DNS is not perfect. And then the final one is understanding your existing identity synchronization. So I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but if you've already got AD Connect or another synchronization, do you want to keep it? Do you want to update it? How do you want that to work? So that's another consideration to work through as you move to Okta. And then before we hit any questions, we'll cover quickly WS-Fed versus SAML. So this is something we see a lot of our customers moving to Office 365 struggle with, and they don't kind of get it. They go, what's WS-Fed? What's SAML? What's the difference? And really but they're actually pretty much same but different, right? And what it boils down to is WS-Fed is an authentication and authentication protocol, and SAML is an authentication and a token provider protocol. So Office 365 uses WS-Fed, and it's used in ADFS as well, and it does authentication, and it actually issues a SAML token. So when you call a WS-Fed URL, it actually gives you back a SAML token, right? It's the same for SAML. You call that URL, you authenticate to it using your SAML, and then you also get a token, right? So WS-Fed uses SAML 1.1, and SAML providers, depending on the company, can use 1.1 or 2. Generally speaking, it's going to be 2 now, right? And the requests are pretty much the same, that they've got different stuff on the end of them. So if you look in those URL examples I've got, you'll pretty clearly see that one of them says SAML request, one of them says WS sign-in, and you can start to validate what it actually does. And each of those attributes does different things for different provider, but it's key to understand that WS-Fed is what's required to be supported for Office 365, and Okta fully supports it because it's obviously a key integration for the platform. All right, so hopefully I've been able to kind of educate you a little bit on the product and the options and the considerations as you move through that decision tree to actually implement Okta within Office 365. I understand there's a lot you can cover in this space, so we've tried to keep it short to 30 minutes. But if anyone's got any questions, we'll kind of sit around in the chat now and go from there. All right. No questions so far, that's all right. There's a fair bit to go on in that area. What we'll do is we'll finish here. And if you have any questions or you want to reach out, you want to find out more about this sort of configuration and this setup, you can reach out at info.xello.com.au and that'll go through to our team. If you'd like a product demonstration, please reach out to me either on LinkedIn or the team at that URL. Yes, we can share the slide deck. We have that as a question, so I can send that through to you guys, and we can get that sorted. There's also going to be a recording of this demo, or this conversation, so we might put that up on YouTube or on the Xello website somewhere for you. But if you'd like to see a product demonstration of Universal Directory or any of the really cool features that Okta provides, please do reach out, and we will end the demo here. Thank you all for attending today, guys. Really, really, really appreciate it. All right. Bye for now.